I'm not gonna fight you.
That is called a commitment device, and it's a strong way to show that you're a dove. Hi, I'm Craig. I'm an economics professor and I love movies, and I especially love using movies to teach economic principles. So today I'm going to go through Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I'm going to go through 3 scenes and show you how game theory and economics help you better understand what's going on in these scenes. And make sure you stick around to the end, where I'm going to talk about how in the 1970s, Marvel was engaged in a Hydra-like conspiracy where they used game theory to become the #1 comic book company in the world.
Natasha.
So our first scene comes at the beginning of the movie. It is a game between Captain America and Batroc. Now, it looks like a fight because it is, of course, a fight, but it turns out fights are a form of a game in economics. So what is a game? A game is when your outcome depends on strategic interactions with other players. One way to better understand games is to understand what is not a game. And a good example of this is just going out to buy something. So I've got a comic book right here. It's an old one, so it doesn't quite fit this example, but imagine there's a new comic book coming out in stores and you're interested in buying them. There's plenty available. It's not like it's a scarce thing. It just happens to be they're being published for the first time. Well, if I want this comic book, if I think Captain America and the Falcon is going to be a book I'm interested in reading, then I can look at my budget and I'll go out and I'll buy it, and then I'll come home happy and I'll read it. I don't have to worry about what other people are doing. The opposite of this is game theory, where you have to worry about what other players are doing and how that's going to affect your actions. So here, Captain America has to worry about what Batroc is going to do. Ideally, Steve would just come in, tell the pirates that they're under arrest, and he would have the situation finished off. But he knows if he goes in with that approach, he's not going to survive very long. So he needs to take a strategic approach to this. That's why he comes in with a surprise attack. He knows strategically it's better to face each of these pirates one-on-one rather than let them know that he's there and try to face all of them at the same time. When we get to the fight, they both have 2 strategies. Batroc does not have to fight. He could surrender and say, fine, I know you're going to win. That would be a dove strategy. He would be taking a peaceful route. Or he can go hawk, which is to engage and be aggressive. Steve, of course, has the same 2 strategies. Now, both of them can play hawk and they can be aggressive. Both of them can play dove and just let things lie. Or one can play hawk and one can play dove. And usually in this situation, the hawk is the one who wins. And Batroc tries to take advantage of this by taunting Steve. Batroc tries to gain the upper hand by making Steve doubt his strategy. Now, I don't know about you, but this feels irrational. Why would Steve give up the hawk strategy and let Batroc play hawk while he's playing dove and make it more costly for him to win and reduce the chances that he's going to win? But it's not irrational because we also need to understand a person's type, their preferences, the things they like. Usually you'll encounter type when you hear about risk preferences, somebody who's a risk taker.
Is he wearing a parachute?
Or somebody who avoids risks.
Excuse us.
In a hawk-dove game, you have dove types and hawk types. Now, they can play either strategy, but Steve is a dove type. He does not like playing hawk unless he has to. He will avoid a fight if possible.
Does anyone want to get out?
So this first scene is good because it introduces us to the concept of types and how types affect payouts, and that's important for the next scene.
Tell me about Zola's algorithm.
So this next scene is the Sitwell interrogation. To just give you some context, Steve has just discovered that Hydra is behind S.H.I.E.L.D. and that there's something called Zola's algorithm. He's trying to interrogate Sitwell to figure out what the algorithm does. Here again, we have another game where both players can play hawk or dove. Sitwell can decide to play hawk and not confess. He can stand his ground.
Never heard of it.
Or he can play dove and he can give Steve the information he wants. Steve can play dove and not harm Sitwell, or he can play hawk and be really aggressive and actually push him off the building. And remember, the hawk is usually the one who wins if the other one plays dove. But Sitwell knows something.
Is this little display meant to insinuate that you can throw me off the roof? Because it's really not just style, Rogers.
Steve is a dove type. Sitwell is not threatened. He can play hawk and not be worried that Steve is going to play hawk too.
You're right. It's not.
This is why often in games you don't want people to know your type, because they know that you're not going to play certain strategies, which lets them take advantage of you. I have a good example of this from a few years ago. I'm standing in a small used car lot worried about which car I can get. I don't have that much money, and most importantly, I need a bigger car because we're expecting our third kid. On the positive side, I have a car that I'm willing to trade in to try and get the car that I want. On the negative side, I am not a car guy. I don't know much about cars. Seeing nice cars doesn't get me excited. When WandaVision had Wanda drive a Buick, people were in uproar on the internet, and that was something that I just didn't care about at all. In that episode, I cared about the price of vibranium, which is why I did my little Economist reacts to that, but that's not here right now. We're talking about me in the car lot, trying to figure out how I'm going to negotiate. Because I'm an economist, I know I need to negotiate, and I know I need to show that I am not a car guy. I need to show them that I'm a car guy, that I know what I'm doing, that I'm going to be a hard negotiator. I go into the office, I sit across from a very stereotypical used car salesman, and explain that I'm bringing in a Jeep for trade-in, and I'm interested in one of the cars on his lot. He asks me which car. Now, I know that I can't reveal that I'm not a car guy, but I need to know which car I'm interested in. So I point and I say, the Denali. Now, if you're not a car person, that might not mean nothing to you. It means nothing to me if someone were to say it, except for now I know the Denali is not the name of the car. The name of the car was a Yukon, and the Denali was the trim. I don't know what trim means. What it really means is that by calling that car a Denali, I clearly was telling him what type I was. I am not a car guy. And so he immediately gained the upper hand in the negotiations. He offered me $400 for my Jeep, which was absurdly low. And I walked away from that negotiation because I realized that I had already lost before it even began. On the positive side, I was able to go somewhere else and sell that car for nearly $3,000 and get the car that I needed. But it's this embarrassing story about how I was trying to hide my type in a negotiation, and I totally blew it. Sitwell feels like the used car salesman right now. He knows Steve is not the hawk type. He knows there's no way Steve is going to be pushing him off that building, so he plays hawk, and he's not saying anything. But then Steve pulls out the surprise strategy and says, I'm a dove, but she's a hawk.
It's hers.
But of course, both of them were playing dove because they knew that Falcon was there to catch him when he fell. Now, by the way, this comic book about Captain America and the Falcon, it is related to that Hydra-like conspiracy that Marvel was involved in the 1970s. In fact, this is the evidence of the conspiracy. So I'm going to get to that at the end of the video, but let's get to our third scene first. So again, this is another fight scene, this time between Steve and Bucky, or Captain America and the Winter Soldier, and they both have their strategies of hawk or dove. Now, this is different than the Sitwell situation because Bucky does not know that Steve is a dove type, and so he's going aggressive. Steve wants to play dove.
Please don't make me do this.
But if he plays dove, he's going to lose. Steve wants to reveal that if Bucky plays dove, he'll play dove too, and he's not going to cheat and play hawk if Bucky decides to play dove. So Steve needs some way to show his type, and that brings up the good question of how do we discover somebody's type? In my car negotiation scheme, I accidentally revealed my type, and maybe you can remember a situation where you accidentally revealed your type. If you have a good story, let me know in the comments below. I would love to know when you spoiled the game by revealing your type. But we can't always rely on somebody accidentally revealing their type, so sometimes we can do some research to find out what their type is.
Zola's algorithm evaluates people's past to predict their future.
And this is what businesses do all the time. As you go online, as you come onto YouTube, websites are collecting data about your behavior to try and serve you the best ad. When you get that ad, it's often specifically targeted for you. Now, maybe Steve is thinking that he can pull some records to show Bucky.
Your bank records, medical histories, voting patterns, emails, phone calls, SAT scores.
Fun fact, the SAT started in 1926, so Steve Rogers may have actually taken it. So if data isn't very useful in this situation, what can Steve do?
I'm not gonna fight you.
That is called a commitment device, and it's a strong way to show that you're a dove. A commitment device is when you take an action to cut off certain strategies that you might play. Steve is throwing away his shield to show that he is not going to engage in Hawk, and he continues to not fight back to show that he's going to keep playing dove. In this case, Steve took a pretty extreme commitment device by completely throwing away the shield. Earlier, he did the commitment device with Batroc by putting the shield on his back, but he could have retrieved that if he needed it. He is playing a strong signal to make sure that Bucky knows that he wants to play dove. This gives Bucky an assurance that if he decides to play dove, that Steve is not going to cheat. This kind of coordination is important if there's an opportunity for the other side to cheat, which brings me to the 1970s. In 1970, Marvel was a small comic book company competing against the industry giant DC. Now, when two companies are competing, you expect them to be doing their best to try and take out the other one. But Marvel and DC had a strange history with their prices. Prices for comic books tended to stay flat, but when they went up for both companies by the same amount at the same time. Now, prices are printed on the cover of a comic book, which means that they have to be known before you go into the printing process. That means if prices are going up at the same time, they were probably coordinated together. There was some evidence that Marvel and DC were actually working together to keep comic book prices high. And this was no more apparent than in 1971 when DC increased comic book prices from 15 cents to 25 cents. That is a 67% increase in price. That would have been a really big shock. But not as big as the shock that came next when Marvel also increased their prices. And again, the timing of this was too short for Marvel to have looked at DC and responded. They must have known ahead of time that they needed to increase prices. So Marvel and DC were likely involved in a cartel where they were coordinating together to keep prices high. Now, if you think of companies competing with each other, you have a hawk and a dove strategy. You can be hawk where you're aggressive and you're trying to compete with the other company, or you have dove where you work together. And when you are in a cartel, you're both playing dove, and that only works as long as the other company doesn't cheat and play Hawk. Well, very quickly, one of them plays Hawk, and it turns out it's Marvel.
Cut off one head, two more shall take its place.
That's actually what this comic is. This is right when Marvel played Hawk. They decreased their price from 25 cents to 20 cents, and they were able to capture the market because they had the cheaper comic book. Kids left DC and they started buying Marvel. DC took a long time to finally adjust down and go to that 20 cents, but by then, Marvel had already become the leading comic book company.
Your death amounts to the same as your life, a zero sum.
Game theory is fun, and economics generally is in a lot of movies. Let me know in the comments below if there's a movie you want me to look at. And if you're interested in more analysis of game theory movies, go ahead and check out my video on The Dark Knight and whether it really is a prisoner's dilemma. Is this how I should do the video?